welcome to Lifestyle Gardening. I'm Kim Todd, and thanks for joining us for another season of wintertime gardening. We know it's cold out there, but we've got a great program to help you warm up and get ready for the upcoming growing season. Today we'll be bringing you ideas for preparing your soil. We'll take a look at a hardy and beautiful shrub. We'll hear some great art ideas from Lincoln artist Margaret Berry, and we'll help you keep taller plants from flopping over in the winter months. To start our program, we're going to focus on a critter that might look cute, warm, and cuddly, but he or she can do a major amount of damage right under the snow. Our wildlife expert Dennis Ferraro tells us that during the winter, those voles are looking for homes and something to eat, and your backyard shrubs are the perfect place to eat and stay warm. Here's Dennis to help us save our plants from these pesky little critters.
While we're inside, snuggled in with the visions of sugar plums in our head, out in our gardens, the voles are ravishing. They're there and they want to feed on something. And usually what they go after are tubers, if the ground is not frozen, or any seed material that may be on the ground in your garden. They will also go after that nice tender bark around the trees. And these voles can do a lot of damage in the winter. They don't hibernate, so while you're inside going through your catalog, looking for new plants for next season, next spring, the voles are out there eating all the plants that are left and still alive but dormant in your garden. They can do a lot of damage, so we need to be cognizant if they're out there. So on a nice halfway decent day in the winter, go out in your garden. Look around for the vole runs. These runs will even be under the snow cover. Look for their holes. They're active even when it's below zero, but underground, and they come up in the day when it gets just above zero. What they'll do is they'll eat any of those tubers, any of those roots of plants that have starches. They'll also girdle your fruit trees. So look around your fruit trees, whether they're flowering fruit or whether they're actual edible fruit trees. They will go after all of them. And the way to get rid of them, whether it's any time of the year, is to use a multi-catch trap. These work in the winter as well as the summer. You can set these traps along these runs that you find, preferably on days when it's not below freezing or not snowing, and just put a little bird seed or grass seed around the entrance of the multi-trap. They'll go in there and they'll get trapped. These traps will hold up to 15 or 20 voles. They will get in there overnight, and they usually follow each other. The more you get, the lower the population will be causing damage. Now, if you can catch them several nights in a row, you probably get most of the population causing damage in your garden. Now, if you feed the birds, be cognizant where that bird seed goes, that the birds don't feed on above the ground. If that bird seed is falling, clean up as much as possible. It'll make it so much easier to catch them in your traps. What'll happen in the traps is that they'll go in there for a little seed, but if there's seed everywhere, they're less likely to go in the traps. You can also use snap traps, such as these. These snap traps with a little molasses, because it's very cold, remember, made into balls of seed, can catch them at any time. Now put those along the runs. Now once you get them trapped, if you leave them in the trap overnight, they will die of exposure due to the coldness. So remember, be humane when you worry about them. You can translocate them to another location where they're not going to cause damage, but you need to get them within 6 hours after you trap them to translocate them. So remember, if you trap them and it's cold out, you need to check those traps very often.
As you just saw, those voles can really tear up an ornamental bed by tunneling under the snow, chewing up the roots of your plants. As their food supply is scarce during the colder months, setting your traps with a little grain will help you keep them out of your overwintering plant beds. We're proud to offer something new this year in a feature we're calling Go Gardening. We want to help beginning gardeners find their way around and how to get started. And as all good gardeners know, good soil makes all the difference in the world. So let's take a few minutes to talk about soil preparations over the winter, and let's go gardening. People ask us all the time about how to get started in the gardening world, and we're going to tell you just go garden. Of course, it's a little bit more complicated than that, and so we're going to do a series on Go Garden, starting with what our master gardeners have done to improve the soil. If you don't have good soil, you're not going to have good landscape plants, whether they're annual, perennial, or trees. It's really simple, actually, to use a cover crop or a green manure crop if you are vegetable gardening or flower gardening. What our master gardeners have done is chosen a cover crop that they seeded this fall. This is actually a fall green manure crop, and it's planted by seed about 4 to 6 weeks before the first killing frost. It includes a number of different plants that are in it for different purposes, of course. We have spring peas, we have some rye, we have a vetch, and the idea behind this is that we seed it in the fall. The things that are going to actually be killed with the frost will be killed if it ever frosts or freezes. And a couple of them, one of the ryes, the winter rye, and the vetch, will return next spring. What we will then do is the master gardeners will turn this under. They'll wait 2 to 3 weeks to plant. The idea behind using a fall green manure crop is this is cool season, so everything will be out of the way when they want to plant their cool season vegetables in the spring. You can also use warm season green manures like buckwheat that go 4 to 6 weeks start to finish. The idea behind those is, of course, they will also attract beneficial insects. All of them improve soil health. So what will happen in this particular instance is this green manure that you see will hold the soil over the winter months. It will get tilled in, and then we will plant in the spring. In contrast to the area that our master gardeners have planted to a fall cover crop, this is a space that they actually have turned over. This had our warm season crops in it, the tomatoes, the Malabar spinach, and some of the peppers. The first thing they did, of course, is wait until a killing frost or a freeze and all that stuff died. Then they removed the debris. That's really important if you start to go garden and you forget about the fact that a lot of our pathogens and some of our insect pests can overwinter in that debris. So they cleaned that off first. If it was not diseased, they put that in the compost pile. But most importantly, what they have done is they have turned the soil by hand in big chunks. They will then stay off that soil over the winter months, and what will happen is the freeze-thaw action will break that soil down. They will go ahead and come back in and top dress with ground up leaves and perhaps some compost. That will work its way down into those cracks and crevices, and then in the spring they will either turn again or they will lightly till. The reason that we don't till in the fall is if we have an open winter and you have a very fine texture to the soil, you may in fact do more harm than good. So again, to be able to prepare the soil in the fall for your garden is really an excellent idea. If you do almost everything right when you start your garden, but you still have poor soil, you're going to have very little success. Good soil contains lots of organic matter, and it's loose enough to help those roots grow deep and strong. If you're new to gardening and you want the best chance at beautiful ornamentals and a bumper harvest, start by getting that soil prepared and keep at it every growing season. For our landscape lesson this week, we're going to take some time to focus on one of our native shrubs that would be a wonderful addition to a home landscape. Our native buckbrush is a great choice for partially shaded areas. It can grow just about anywhere, including in poor soil conditions. It's great for pollinators and attracting wildlife as well. And in the fall, it really comes into its own with those wonderful fruits. You gotta love a plant that has multiple uses in the landscape and is also a workhorse. This is our native buckbrush or coralberry or Indian currant. Latin name is Symphorocarpus or Biculatus, which is kind of a mouthful, but look at what this plant does in the winter landscape. It survives all sorts of conditions. It is native, and it is one of those go-to plants for a lot of our native bees and pollinators. It forms a colony slowly by suckering and by rooting where those tips touch the ground. It survives in woodlands, part shade, full shade, gets a little thinner in full shade, but it also tolerates dry conditions, crummy old construction soil, which is pretty unusual, and it looks like this in the fall and the winter months. It's in the honeysuckle family. The flowers are small in the spring, not very showy. So again, it's not one of those plants you plant for spring interest or great big in your face summer bloom, but if you're a pollinating insect, you're going to love that nectar. And for human beings, you have to love the beautiful appearance of the coral berries, which is of course where it gets one of its most common names, and the fact that these can not only persist throughout the winter months, but also be a great floral decoration if you want to cut them and take them in for the winter. They are great bird food. Also, some small critters and creatures will eat them, but for the most part, they're going to remain on the plant well into the spring of the season. This is an easy shrub to manage. One thing you don't want to do is cut it all the way back to the ground every single season, because it is in fact a shrub, a woody shrub, not one of those suffrutescent things, not a perennial. So you want to make sure that you allow it to become a thicket. That might make it a bit difficult and tangled to clean out and get rid of all the leaves and those sorts of things, but in an environment where the plant itself can cover up the undergrowth, it looks pretty darn good during the winter months. The coral berries also have been hybridized with other coral berries, with snowberries, but in my book, this is the absolute best of the best. There's one called Hancock that is a ground cover form, doesn't fruit, doesn't seem to like the best conditions or the conditions that this one does. So go out and hunt for our native coral berry, put it in your landscape, enjoy it outside, enjoy it inside. You can hardly go wrong with this shrub that is beloved by pollinators, that feeds and shelters wildlife, and can grow just about any place. It'll put on a show in both the spring with its teensy flowers and in the fall with that burst of color from all the berries, which actually lasts through the winter months. In past seasons of lifestyle gardening, we've looked at both art in the garden and the garden is art. For our very first interview this year, we're going to be talking to Lincoln artist Margaret Berry and hear about how her garden inspires her artwork and how she incorporates her plant material into her paintings. You might recall that on Backyard Farmer last season we had a great segment with Margaret Berry in her own backyard because she uses those materials as artist in residence for the Lincoln Marriott Cornhusker Hotel, and she is pretty much one of a kind. So we are really fortunate to be able to have her in the studio today, and we are going to be talking to her about exactly how this process works. So Margaret, describe this whole thing to us.
Well, the process is called encaustic, and it's the use of heated beeswax to create art. We actually temper the beeswax with tree sap and add pigment to it to make a paint, but that's basically what it is. It's hot wax painting.
Okay, you probably have a favorite material out of the landscape, and we're not talking about agronomic. What would be that favorite material, and where do you find that one?
I actually do. I find myself using over and over again. First of all, they have to be dried materials so as to actually attach to the wax, but they would be like ginkgo leaves, bittersweet, hollyhock leaves that have been laced by bugs is one of my favorite things. And then just all kinds of found materials that I'll see and just collect. And that's what makes it fun. It's like a lifelong adventure to find new materials in the landscape.
You use an awful lot of corn in your work, and in fact your email has something to do with that great Nebraska crop. Why corn? What got you started with corn?
Well, I am corn-fed, and having grown up on a corn farm, it was a part of our lives, and it just seems natural in Nebraska too to focus on corn. It's such a great icon for our state, and it's for all kinds of cultures, not just Nebraska. So I like that ancient connection to a crop like corn. It's just so rich in symbolism and in the shape. For an artist, shape, line, texture, all those things make me enjoy corn as the subject of my art.
Margaret, everything you do is great with this outdoor stuff and this encaustic method, but it hangs on walls inside. Is it possible for any of these pieces to be art in the garden outdoors? And if so, for how long and how would it be protected?
Yes, actually I do hang my own work outside in the summer, partly because I run out of room, and so it's very handy to hang things under the eaves. The only thing you can't do is hang in direct sun, or they'll droop. Not necessarily melt into a puddle at the bottom of the painting, but they will droop. So that's the only thing you can't do, because as you know, beeswax is nature's best, one of its best preservatives. So it's moisture proof, insect proof, in general a great material to have outside as long as it's protected from the hot sun.
Margaret, we want to thank you so much, first off, for sharing your garden this summer, and certainly for sharing your expertise in your studio this afternoon. Lots of people love growing things to eat out of their own backyard, and who doesn't love spring flowers popping out of the ground after a long winter? But your landscape and garden can also inspire you, and they can be a place of refuge from the rat race. Alrighty, let's take a few minutes now to answer our viewer email. We'd love to hear from you. Perhaps you could share a picture or two with us as well. Just send us an email to byf@unl.edu. Our first question comes from a viewer who sent this in late October, and it's about collard greens. We're seeing more of these show up in stores and certainly at farmers markets, even though a lot of us consider this sort of a southern dish. Her question is, what is this white, powdery sort of stuff on the upper surfaces of the leaves? She said this was a volunteer plant that came up from a previous collard planting, and she's seeing this return in her garden. Powdery mildew is totally different than downy mildew in terms of both the control and the damage that it actually does and the conditions that it needs. And powdery mildew really is going to show up with kind of cool nights, a little drier air, doesn't like to be overhead watered particularly, and it is one of those things as well that you can control if you use a sulfur spray. You're going to go ahead and wash that off before you eat them. You can also do a preventative if absolutely necessary, but the ideal preventative is to do good sanitation. The spores of the mildews are going to overwinter, the powdery mildew in particular in this case, since that is what she has. So what you want to make sure you do is get rid of all that upper surface, make sure that your seeds are clean. If you're going to till those collards in and under, all the debris should also be cleaned up around it. Ideally, she would also rotate her crop. If she has downy mildew, we're talking about a completely different kind of a situation that can actually kill the plants. So again, sanitation is really one of the best things you can do. Cleanliness, and make sure that you know which mildew you have to deal with. Our second question comes from Carney. This is a viewer who has a red maple. The pictures came in late fall, and there's bark splitting all the way up the trunk. He first saw this last year, went up into the branches, and then of course had a thinner canopy in that tree as well. We had a lot of questions last year about thin bark trees, maples and pears in particular, that were blasting their bark. In this particular instance, his question is this tree a goner? Should he go ahead and start over? What can he do about it? Unfortunately, if you look at the damage on this tree, and you also look at the planting conditions, which appear to be a ring of stones and then some soil that has been added at the base of that tree, the trunk has been buried. So south-southwest facing, thin bark tree, red maple in Carney, probably not the best situation for that to begin with. I know people like the red fall color on the maples. Maples are a maple linden, maple birch plant community. They like things that are a little bit colder. They like east and north facing. They don't like that wind and that winter desiccation. So our suggestion would really be, let's go ahead and take that tree out rather than trying to give it a little bit of emergency care and start over with something that would be a little bit more appropriate for the conditions. Our third question is fun. We don't know where this viewer sent this picture from, But we did have a couple of these late season last year, and this one again came in late fall. His question is, what in the world is this insect? It's very large. I think we had a couple of pictures of this again last season late. And what this guy is a wheel bug, so named for that wheel-like appendage on its back that really, if bugs have backs, and it's actually one of the assassin bugs. Monstrous big, and it gets its name assassin bugs because that's actually what it does. It's a beneficial insect. So what it does is it goes after and it pierces the bodies of pretty much soft-bodied insects, caterpillars, aphids, those kinds of things, paralyzes them, and then within 30 seconds has sort of consumed all of the good parts out of that poor soft creature. Now here's the deal, they're beneficial. They only have one generation during the season, and they look pretty much the same when they're little, so they don't go through some sort of a strange metamorphosis where there's something different. So little guys get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. They are beneficial, as I said, but their bite is dreadful, if you can call it a bite. It's actually a pierce, and it is, according to the people who have been bitten by an assassin bug, way worse than a wasp sting, and it can last weeks to heal. So look at a distance. They're solitary and they're shy, but don't make it mad or it's going to attempt to assassinate your finger or something like that. All right, our fourth question has to do with turf and dry winter conditions and dry cold winter conditions in particular. The question really is, there's a lot of foot traffic and some tire traffic, whether it is supposed to be that way or not, through the turf, on the frozen turf. Is this going to be damaging, and what can be done about it? Our recommendation is stay off that turf if at all possible. We know that's not realistic in situations where you're out in the yard or it's a path from one point to another, or it's a school grounds or a park. But ideally, at least don't walk in the same path or drive in the same path when that turf is frozen and when it does not have a cover of snow to help insulate the crowns. The issue with that, with stepping on it in frozen conditions or driving on it, is those crowns can be pretty significantly damaged, and then the recovery in the spring may take a lot longer if it recovers at all. So again, cautionary note is stay on the paths that hopefully have been plowed as opposed to walking on that turf that has been frozen. For our final feature today, we're going to help you with a common problem. Tall ornamental grasses, asters and sedums, can put on quite a show in the late fall, but they can also be susceptible to flopping. There are a few reasons for this issue, and most of them are preventable. You know, we choose and place plants in our landscapes for their aesthetic qualities, and we want them to behave certain ways. Sometimes a lot of fuzz and a lot of flop is really appropriate. In other situations, we want them to be a little bit better managed. We're going to talk a little bit today about how to manage those plants that flop and discuss which ones tend to flop the most. I want to start with grasses, whether they are ornamental grasses or many of our natives, such as little blue stem. This is a perfect example of one of the grasses that flops if a couple of different conditions exist. First off, knowing that this plant likes sun and likes it dry would suggest that its growth habit is going to be different if you put it in a situation where it gets a little bit too much shade and a little bit or a lot too much water. That causes the top growth to be heavy, the plant falls over. We no longer have it contributing to the landscape in the ways in which we wanted it. Same thing will happen with our switchgrasses, our native love grass, and even to a lesser extent, some of our other ornamental grasses. We don't typically expect balloon flowers to be one of those plants that flops, but again, given conditions that might include too much water during a certain season and damage to the crowns, in this case probably vole damage, what happens is the base of that plant becomes weakened, the top is really, really heavy, and the plant begins to fall over. Asters and sneezeweed or Helen's flower are other examples of plants that may have such top-heavy growth when they're in flower, especially if they have an unbranched stem, that unless you manage them properly, they may flop during the season and open up in the center as well. Plants that have been in place too long may actually exhaust their environment, and they flop along the edges because the center is completely died out. Siberian iris is one example. Sedums will do the same thing. So what exactly do we do about these plants that want to flop or lodge, whether it is genetics, environmental, or age? We have some options available to us. The first of those is to look at the environment and make sure that you have selected a plant for its growing conditions, or modify those conditions. Stop watering if it's a plant that really doesn't want water. If the landscape has changed over time and you have too much shade for plants that are going to flop in shade, move the plants, prune the tree if you need to do that. If the plant is old, go ahead and dig and divide at the proper time, making sure that you take good pieces of the old plant. Again, put those into the right environment. You can also pinch or cut back by 1/3 for certain plants. Sedum is one of those that if you cut it back by about 1/3 during the early part of the summer, it will actually stay shorter, bloom a little bit closer down into the crown of the plant, and won't get those top-heavy floppy stems. One of the main things to understand, however, is there are certain perennials that if you do cut them back like that, they are not going to branch and bloom. And of course, the other option is to go ahead and cage. And the beauty of caging, if you do it early in the season, and again, if those environmental conditions are correct, is that the cage sits, the plant grows through it, everything really looks the way you want it to look, and you haven't had to deal with cutting or moving those plants. Garden chores like this might not be a whole lot of fun, but they really can mean the difference between healthier, vibrant plants during the growing season or plants that die out altogether. Try to understand what those plants need, where they're growing, and whether they're going to need help standing tall in the cold. Thank you so much for joining us again for Lifestyle Gardening. Next time we'll be taking a look at growing hops in Nebraska, and we'll interview a local brewer. Don't forget to check us out on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. So good afternoon, good gardening. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time on Lifestyle Gardening.